called Very Good Looking, and what I'm going to be talking, I'm going to read 3 sort of shorter sections to you. There's stories of all different lengths in here, so if you like a longer story, it's in here, but I've picked the shorter, funnier ones for you to sort of keep you interested. And I'm going to talk a little bit about writing. I was told that this was a crowd of people who, that would shine a spotlight on the relationships and the writing of the stories and the relationships. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is about the titles, Very Good Looking, which causes some concern for people. And I'm often asked, what does your wife think of that? Unfortunately for me, my wife is also a writer, so she doesn't worry about what titles are. She understands that you have to, you got to move some units. You got to make it sexy. This is, which is why also I'm not on the cover. They put something else. The title came from a Craigslist match ad that I read, and I was astounded by it. Married but looking, and it just struck me that what the possibilities of that were, because to me it's more than just looking for a relationship or a fling or something like that, but you're still looking, even though you're in the marriage, for other things, whether it's affirmations or somebody telling you that you made the right decision in life, that sort of thing. And one of the things that I've been married for 18 years, and you can't really have a title like this unless you have a good rock solid marriage, and it does take all that work and all that stuff. But I met up with a friend of mine that I hadn't seen since college, and he knew my wife Molly before we were married. And the first thing he asked me, after we said, after we lied and said, well, we still look the same, he said, 18 years with Molly, have you cheated on her? And it was the first question he asked. He's not married, I should have told you. He's still a bachelor. I thought that's the question that a bachelor would ask somebody who's been married for a long time. That's like probably your main concern as you reach your 40s. Had I gotten married, would I have cheated? And so it's certainly a universal issue. The first story I'm going to read to you is called The Kiss, and it's a dating story. I thought I'd start with a date, then move on to a marriage, and then kind of a marriage in trouble sort of thing. See the whole panoply there. And I should also say that I wrote this story before I was married, which makes sense because it's about the sort of discomfort that you have in asking people out. And it's also before I had a job. So these people in the story, they have jobs. You kind of think to yourself when they're talking about their work, this is somebody who's never actually had a job. He's still basically an undergrad. So it's called The Kiss. She was engaged, but not to him. He asked for a date to the theater because he knew that her fiancé was out of town. She agreed because they had known each other for years. They had worked side by side with the animals, feeding them, taking care of them, cleaning the cages, and they had a good time together even though they were at work. I imagined everybody got to be a zookeeper or something if they wanted to be when they were older. I might have to go to so far I'm not changing. He was funny, she was smart and pretty. He was kind of fat, had yellow teeth, but you didn't notice them after a couple minutes. I'll go because Richard is out of town, and I bet it would be interesting to see a play with you, she answered. I've never seen one before, a real play, and so you'll be able to point stuff out that I might miss otherwise. Themes in the writing, or maybe acting techniques. He picked her up at her sister's, where she was staying. She got in his car. You look very nice, he said. Her hair was more fluffed up than at work, and her nails had been painted red. She thanked him and smiled. He had said she looked very nice before, in fact, lots of times. He was saying it about once a week at work, although now tonight, with her hair and nails fixed up and sitting in the car, she looked particularly nice to him. After the date, on the way home, he asked, what did you think of the play? It was strange, she answered. They really socked it to the status quo, I guess, although not as much as I expected. I think the primary target was the mainstream theater establishment, he said, and since you've never seen a serious play before, you probably missed some of the subtle jabs, like all the references to cattle calls. Yeah, maybe that was it. It seems a little silly to get so angry just because people like plays with music in them. They call those types of plays musicals, he told her. I know, and I know what a cattle call is too. He pulled into her sister's driveway and let the car idle. It should be interesting to read the reviews tomorrow. Oh, I'm sorry, that's her voice. It should be interesting to read the reviews tomorrow. He shut the car off and faced her. They were both quiet for a moment, although she was smiling. Thank you for coming, he said. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really glad I saw a real play. More silence. He turned the ignition key one click and found a classical music station. His heart was pounding and his hands were getting moist. He was afraid he was being too obvious, but she made no moves to leave the car. Also, the beer was good, she said. They had walked to a bar near the theater after the play and had each tried a different imported beer. They had sipped from both glasses, comparing the flavors. It's a good idea to try a new beer, he agreed. He was watching her lips very closely now. They were painted the exact same red as her nails, and in the dark car they seemed to be hovering in front of her face. His own lips felt very dry, but he figured it was because of the pressure of what was happening, and that they were actually probably moist enough. Either way, he sure wasn't about to let her see him licking his lips. I should probably go inside now. I've seen my sister peek out the window more than once already, and I don't want to give her the wrong impression. Okay, I understand, but before you go, what? I want to kiss you goodnight, he said. You do? He was watching her very closely, and he noted that she hadn't flinched or made a face or done anything to indicate offense. I think we should. I mean, I know you're engaged and everything, but it seems... Oh, the engagement isn't the issue, she said. I was wondering if that's appropriate to this evening. A kiss, I mean. I think so. Yes, definitely. And not just the evening, but also the way we are at work, always together. People calling us frick and frack. Sometimes bickering like an old married couple about the animals, and all the while we're aware of how it sounds and looks to other people, and we don't care. More than don't care, I think we enjoy giving off the impression that we're closer to each other than we are to any of them. It sets us apart. It gives them something to gossip about, the way we're a team and have fun together, even when we're cleaning the tanks. Absolutely. And I don't think I could be as close to you as anyone at work, or maybe anyone else, other than you. Me too. And if it wasn't for my fiancé, I would say that I'm closer to you than to anyone. Right. And if we didn't work together, we might be dating right now. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I don't know about that. I like you because I've gotten to know you so well at work. If we had just met, well, you don't exactly look like my type. No offense. None taken. And of course, I understand completely. Your fiancé is very handsome and not at all like me. No, I think you're handsome, just in an entirely different way than the men I dated. Also, you're smart, and that's not a put-down of my fiancé. He's smart too, but not like you are. And that's something I wouldn't have found out if I had just met you in a bar the way I had met my fiancé. Well, despite it all, he said, I really want to kiss you goodnight. I don't want to sleep with you or feel your breasts or have you do anything that would make you feel strange about me Monday at work, but I really do want to give you a kiss right now, just for a little bit. You don't want to feel my breasts because you think they're small. And the way you said kiss me a little bit, that makes me think you want to have a passionate kiss with our tongues, which wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I was considering letting you kiss me. Wait a minute, hold up a sec. I do want to feel your breasts. Of course I do. Size doesn't matter. Anyway, they look bigger in that t-shirt that you're wearing. Of course, I'm just saying that for our purposes right now, a kiss is all we ought to do to consummate the evening, to a certain extent of friendship. Consummate, she asked. Bad choice of words. I should have said that, bad choice of words. I would love to feel your breasts, even with my mouth a little if you wanted, but a kiss is what I have on my mind. And about my tongue, I can guarantee that I won't use it unless our lips linger naturally on each other and it goes into your mouth on its own, and my tongue. You can do the same. Use my tongue? Only if that's the natural progression. As for now, I want to give you just a sweet kiss goodnight. So you're just going to lean in and kiss me nicely. You aren't going to move your lips and down, up and down, and possibly start to bite my lower or upper lip. You seem like the kind of guy who would kiss like that. I wouldn't. Although in truth I do like to kiss like that. But since you ask, I promise not to. Not at first. Not if it doesn't happen like that on its own. You know, I may not look like it, but a lot of women say that I'm a pretty good kisser. I get some repeat business, you know. She snorted. I don't have trouble believing that at all. Although now that you say it, I'm a little concerned that I won't be up to your standards. My lips are kind of thin, and no one's ever commented on my abilities. That's it. I can tell we'd be perfect for each other, and I don't mean that in a scary way, like I think about you all the time. I do think about you more than I would just a regular friend, but I know you have a fiancé, and I'm trying to get beyond it. But believe me, I do want to sleep with you and fondle your breasts and your buttocks too. Only, I guess, if it's kind of pointless with the position in life that we're in. Agreed. So the right thing would have been to not go out tonight and not even discuss doing anything outside of work. Because my biggest fear, even bigger than messing things up with my fiancé, is that things will get messed up between you and me at work. Exactly, he said. We have a great working relationship and we have to be careful of it. I'd hate my job if you weren't around. And I feel exactly the same way. I'm very glad you said that. Still, he said, we've come all this way and I want to give you a good night kiss before we call it a night. If it happens, you said, it'll be sweet and respectful and on the lips without too much slobbering on each other's faces? Absolutely. And what about your hands? I'll put my hands on your arm above your elbow like this, and I'll place my left hand on your left shoulder. He unbuckled his seatbelt, moved over to her, and arranged his hands just as he described. She allowed herself to be moved to accommodate the new position. I guess that'll be okay, she said, but make sure your hands stay that way. If things get a little passionate during the kiss, I don't want any romance. Okay, but what if I squeeze you a little bit while still keeping my hands where they are? Yeah, that might be nice, she said, especially on my shoulder. I got it now. And what about my hands? As she shifted, she felt her breath on his nose, but just for a second. She rested her palms on his hips, thumbs hooked over his belt, fingers digging gently into his paunch. They had never been this physically close before, and he found it difficult to swallow. He was sure that he could hear his saliva moving up and down his throat, and he wished his own hands weren't sweating quite so much. Is it okay if I hold on to your sides during the kiss? She asked. It's okay, but your hand so close to my stomach reminds me of how overweight I am. He was happy to be talking and hiding the sound of his heavy swallowing. How about if you put your hands on my back more, and that way we can be closer too? She did. That was a good idea, she said. I could already tell that those other girls were right about you, and you really do know what goes into a good kiss. He smiled. She was smiling too. Her face was distorted this close, and he didn't know if it was her. Her face was distorted this close up, and if he didn't know it was her, that normally from a distance she was attractive, he would have been repulsed. She was looking quite closely at him too, although maybe she was examining him with this new perspective and finding him even more hideous. He hoped she understood the way one's vision distorts at close range as well as he did. He cleared his throat again, but didn't move. They sat like that for a few seconds, looking at each other's faces, considering, listening, taking inventories. They waited for something to happen. I think I might go in now, she finally said. No kiss, he asked. Not just now. Are you mad? No, I'm not mad. And on Monday, everything will be exactly the same with us. Good. And thank you again for the play. My pleasure again. She moved around, pulling her purse up to her shoulder and reached for the door. I think about you also, she said. Not a crazy amount, but slightly more than I would a regular platonic friend. Good night, he said. He made sure she got into the house safely before backing onto the street. So that's that one. Just gonna get in the water. I'm not walking away. I'm not begging you for a club. So that was, is that awkward?
Should we hold our applause? Should we hold our applause?
Yes. until everybody's gotten their diploma, I would appreciate it. The inspiration for that story, and because this is supposed to be about writing, I would say the inspiration for that story was when I was an undergrad. People were first, at least I was becoming aware. This was in the mid '80s, so quite a long time ago. People were starting to become aware of the sort of take back the night was a thing, and this kind of sexual politics between young men and women were starting to come to the forefront. People were trying to put into a structure the way that men and women should behave each other around each other on college campuses. And I believe this started on Bennington campus, and I was at Columbia College and made our way there too. We were told that when you were out on a date, every time that you wanted to make a move, or go to another base, as we used to say back then, you had to say to the person you were with, "May I increase the level of intimacy?" so if you were like up to the play and you want to go to first base, you had to say, "May I increase the level of intimacy?" And I assume that until you got a strong affirmative, you had to kind of like stay put. So that was the idea that like I sort of imagined dates in those days, and I imagined a lot of talking going on. So that's where that came out. I'm not Facebook. Okay. The next thing I wanted to read is a marriage story, and I have to admit that my male and female voices are very limited. I'm not much of an actor, so you're going to notice. You can pretend it's the same couple, but much older. And this is called Just Like Spain. And actually, there's some, I don't know if any of you were at Professor Davis' talk previously, but there's some overlapping ideas here about language, but I'll just read it for you. First time it happened, he was in the condo hallway, just after bolting the door behind him and pocketing the keys. It usually smelled like soup in his building this time of night, something heavy, onions or cabbage. Even though he was alone in the hall, he took a big, showy sniff. Spain, he said. His nostrils flexed and twitched theatrically. If someone opened the door, he wanted to be seen sniffing and twisting his neck around comically so that he might suddenly notice the neighbor and say, "What is that? Do you smell that? You know what it reminds me of?" He took off down the steps and into the early winter darkness where his wife, Carol, was waiting for him in the passenger seat of the running and heated car. Stewart continued to think about Spain even as he pulled into the Friday night traffic. "I'm thinking about Spain," he told Carol. "Oh, the way the light is now, kind of purplish as though it were midnight even though it isn't. That's how all the nights were in Spain." "All the time?" "Well, when I was there. And the traffic was like this too, in Madrid, on the big streets. I was there only once, Madrid. Mostly I lived in a little village called San Fernando, San Francisco. I can't remember anymore. Isn't that funny? Going on 10 years already. That's wild. That was where it's wild that I was there now, and I'm not even sure of the name. Can we turn on the radio to the oldies station? I only listen to oldies in Spain because that's what they played on the radio station from an American military base. Okay, now concentrate on finding a space. Concentrate, don't just wish for it. He found a tight spot a few blocks down and managed to squeeze in. Carol waited as Stuart inspected the inch of space between the cars in front and back, and then came around to take her arm. You know, he said, this is the same temperature it was every day when I was in Spain. She nodded. It was just like this, dry and cold, and a little bit of a breeze. He sniffed. I swear I can feel the Mediterranean. That's weird how everything's reminding me of it. The light, too, just like Spain. This exact shade of yellow on all the streets. The same eerie kind of soft shadows, like a cubist painting. I didn't see any while I was there. Picasso was born there. Or maybe he just lived there when he got rich. Also, that weird guy, what do you call him? With the melting watches. What do you even call him? He lived there. The restaurant was crowded. They stood in a throng at the bar and waited. She flipped through a free neighborhood newspaper that had been discarded by the door. He worked on a bowl of salsa, scooping large portions of it with triangle chips, using the ones with the bent corners. He started to laugh. You know what, honey? 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 She looked up from the paper with a blank expression. The first time I tried to use Spanish on the metro, that's what they call the subway in Spain. I asked for, 10 old ladies instead of 10 trips. See, the words in Spanish are real similar, viajes and viajas. I can't remember which is which anymore, but oh boy, did I get some funny looks. When they were seated, he noticed that all the tables were close together. He chuckled and was about to say that this too reminded him of Spain, tables so close you could be dining with strangers, but he decided against it. Carol ordered a fried vegetable plate as an appetizer, and he asked for another rum and coke. When the appetizer came, they ate off the serving platter, not bothering to use the little plates. When it was all gone, she said, I love sweet potatoes. And he said, did we eat sweet potatoes? No, but the dish. Not the dish, I mean the food. All those fried veggies. The last time I had something like that, it had sweet potatoes. The main course came and the waiter warned them that the bottoms of the plates were hot. They both nodded. A basket of warm French bread was put on the table. As soon as the waiter left, Stuart pulled a fistful of bread off the loaf for himself. Look at this, he said. This is so Spanish. He waved the plug in front of her face and she followed with her eyeballs. This feels Spanish. A loaf of French bread, the polite waiter, the cramped tables. He couldn't resist adding the last one. In Spain, you say garçon when you mean the waiter, but actually it literally means boy, not waiter, he told her. She nodded and took some French bread. When her mouth was full, she said, that's actually French. When the last of the food was gone, he checked his watch. The movie didn't start for another half hour. They were right on schedule. This pleased him immensely. He waved his arm and caught the waiter's attention and made a writing motion with his hand and wrist. He laughed. This is too much. I know this is going to sound hard to believe, but I asked for the bill the same way I always did in Spain. He shook his head. Maybe I'm in Spain, he told her. Where am I then, she asked. Spain. Spain too. Spain with me. The movie was lousy, a silly romance they both couldn't stand. Stuart stayed with it because the female lead reminded him of another actress that he really liked. On the way out, he walked past the concession stand. No Toblerone, he pointed out. That's what they eat in movie theaters in. She cut him off. Maybe we could travel somewhere, she said, pushing on the glass door. He answered quickly, well, it's a good idea. We haven't been anywhere since the retreat in Maine, and that was like 5 years ago already. Time really flies. I can't believe it's been 10 years since I went to Spain. We can go somewhere romantic. I wonder if I still have my passport. Mine's expired, I think. He unlocked the passenger door. I only used it once. The bedroom felt stuffy. He cracked the window, and she reciprocated by laying the comforter over the blanket. They got in bed and pulled the covers up. He turned off the light. I don't know if we can go anywhere for too long about this vacation idea, he said. I don't get more than a week off, and probably not more than a long weekend, like a Thursday and Friday with Saturday and Sunday in the middle. We couldn't go too far. Not that we could anyway with the time constraint, but money too. She shifted on her side, moving her shoulder back and forth to get comfortable. It's too bad we can't just up and go like I did when I graduated college and went to Spain. Sweetheart, she said, can you get me a glass of water? He got up and went to the kitchen, filled a glass under the tap, and put an ice cube in it. He snuck a sip on the way back to the bedroom. Thank you, she said, and took a few loud gulps. He could hear the water sloshing into her stomach as he got back into bed. Ah, here. She handed him the empty glass, which he put on the nightstand. Don't just leave it there, she said. Take it back to the sink, please, and rinse it out and put it in the dishwasher. He got up and rinsed the glass, but left it in the sink. When he walked back to the bedroom, and got under the covers. She said, "Hey, do you want to?" "Do you?" "Why not?" she answered. "Movie, dinner? Why not?" "Okay. Do we have anything?" she asked. He sighed. "We do." His voice trailed off. "But you won't put one on," she said. She made her voice more nasally to mimic him. "Can't feel a thing." He patted her shoulder. "Spoon me," she said. He pressed his knees into the back of her knee. "Spoon me," she said, all the way. He hugged her and smelled her hair and closed his eyes. "Spoon me." He hugged her and smelled her hair once again, closed his eyes. "That's nice," she told him. "Thank you." "They nada," he answered. Her breathing got heavier. Her breathing got heavier. Stuart listened. He thought about the bullfighting ring, the one he had visited in Madrid. He pictured himself in the center, bowing low to the cheering crowds in the stands. The Queen was watching him from the royal box, many rows up. The great bull charged, and Stuart sunk his steel deep between the shoulders of the beast. The bull stumbled and fell, and when it was too weak to struggle, Stuart rushed in and cut off its ear. Following tradition, he took the beret off his head and solemnly approached the front row. He handed his beret to a spectator, who passed it up to another, so that eventually it would reach the Queen. Stuart watched his beret ascend the crowd slowly, waiting for the applause to die down, for the adulation of the crowd to subside, and for the long-awaited moment, sweet acknowledgement from the Queen. Thanks. So that's a marriage story. You don't have to hold your applause. So this is supposed to be about the experience of writing, and that's obviously a story that, I had written when I was just starting getting married, and I was projecting years into the future what life would be like, and I imagined it to be a lot more bleak than it actually is, I'm glad to say. I have one more quick one I can do, or we can just have a conversation, which I'm happy to have. I was told that there might be questions about writing or about writing relationships. But what's interesting about writing relationships, and I didn't really set out to do it. But it turns out that once you get a couple of stories published, you look back and you see that there are these themes. And so you sort of have to imagine what other people's relationships are like, and you have to really pay a lot of close attention. And I read a lot of advice columns. I don't really read the advice, but I like to read, Dear Prudence and Dan Savage and stuff like that. I just want to hear the situations people find themselves in. And that sort of kind of inspires you to maybe inject some of your own personal experiences in there, but then maybe also to see what other people are doing. Are there any questions at this point? I caught you in a stretch, but I know that's not a question. I also teach. I teach at Northern, so I can tell the difference between a stretch. What? You're forcing me to go back to the book. Okay, I'm going to go back to the book. I love hearing my stories. These are great. This is actually a bicycling story, and I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but I'm going to read the part that involves the relationship. It's a bicycling story, and it's about, it's called Tandem. So it's about a marriage, and it's also about riding a bicycle. And one of the stories that I have in here, which I'm not going to read to you, is called Sentimental Values. And I have this kind of crazy mother-in-law who has a lot of garage sales. Not like anybody in particular. And one day my wife was helping her mother with this garage sale. And I went in there to see how it was going, and she had her wedding dress hanging up on the rafters. And I thought, this couldn't possibly be a good sign. I mean, I thought we were supposed to save it. We had spent some money on it, not as much as some. And so that was the inspiration for a story, not the one I'm going to read to you. But this story also begins with a couple in bed, like the last one ended. And I think that a lot of negotiations about the marriage occur in bed, and I'm not talking about the sexual stuff, but it's about like where your feet go and who's going to warm up whose feet, and, the sort of where you're going to place the pillows, and there's no kind of more ambiguous feeling in the world than getting up out of bed in the morning and then you just went to the bathroom, but you come back and your space is completely gone because that person just kind of moved in, occupied the territory, and so there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the bed. And this story is called Tandem. The moon was orange the evening he got back, and he whistled while wrestling his bicycle down from the car roof. He heaved it over his head and left it to dangle upside down like a bat in the garage. Then he took a beer into the shower with him and drank it down while a week's worth of street dust and chain grease washed into the drain. Then he gets into bed. I just wanted to read the part about the beer because it was going to make me I had an epiphany, he said into the darkness, feeling his way into his groove next to her body. I'm sorry I've been so mad for so long, keeping my anger inside, but I've let it all go now, and everything's going to be different. She thought, he thinks he keeps his anger inside, but slid over to make room for him. She reshifted her battery of pillows, fluffy dark under her bed, pinky feathers clutched tightly against her stomach, a third propped between her knees, and then she took his hand from her breast. Sounds like you had a peak experience, she said, curling his fingers into her fist. No pun intended on peak. It'll pass, and within a day or two, you'll go back to being exactly the same person you were before you left. I'm happy you're back. There would be tests to his new resolve, challenges to the way in which he had decided to live his life post-epiphany, and this was shaping up to be an unexpectedly early one of those. He inhaled the back of her head. The epiphany happened when I was climbing down Monarch Pass. Summit's 11,000 feet, and the climb was 9 miles straight up, 3 hours of relentless pedaling. The air is so thin up there, and then you have to go down the other side, 7,000 feet straight down. Dangerous, twisty road. I was terrified. I was really, really scared. You start to see signs for runaway truck turnouts, and then you think about all the things that can go wrong with a bike. I feathered my brakes. Do you know what that means, to feather your brakes? Hand me my BlackBerry and I'll check Wikipedia. Like this. He took first her breast and then her shoulder, alternately squeezing and releasing. With the brakes, back and forth. First back, then gently on the front, easing off on both. Got it, okay, thanks for the demonstration. Maybe you're enjoying this too much? He kissed the back of her neck, pressed into my feet. If I spilled, the momentum alone would probably have pulled me over the side and slowed me down, carried me over the mountain, carried me over the side of the mountain. She pressed back into him. Sounds scary. It is, until it isn't. Suddenly, just out of nowhere, the fear lifts like a blowing veil, leaving the most amazing free feeling. No fear now, just the wind and the speed and the bike. I started to describe the feeling of myself in my head so I could remember them, the feeling of being connected to something way out of proportion to my size. I thought, this is like riding a broomstick. Now, of course, I've never ridden a broomstick. No one has, but that's the feeling. Just hanging on to this thing, keeping it steadily between your legs while soaring. I kept narrating this descent to myself so I could remember it later. Being able to describe coming down Monarch became the most important thing in the world to me. The only thing. I wanted to be able to share it with you. And then suddenly, he felt the familiar moistening in the corner of his eyes that this part of the story always brought. It didn't seem to matter if he was telling it in the campground, or at the beer garden, or even just in his head practicing. If the lights had been on, she could have seen the emotion in his face. Suddenly, epiphany. I realized I couldn't keep it. The ride would be over, and when the ride was over, the elation would be gone. I couldn't go back up and do it again. I couldn't slow it down, and I knew I wasn't ever going to even really remember it again. Not really. His voice had slowed it, had halted it a few times, and he wasn't even forcing it. His throat had tightened a little. They were sharing the moment now, his retelling of the epiphany, and she kissed his fingers laced in hers. I was descending Monarch right then on my bicycle. It was happening, but I understood the experience wasn't mine to keep. I started to cry, to tell you the truth, but I held back because at that speed I couldn't take my hands off the handlebars long enough to wipe my eyes. I understood that for a moment, you get that moment and then it's gone. Later, reflecting on it in my tent in Salida, I recognized it really wasn't anything new that had occurred to me. Fact is, my epiphany was maybe the oldest one in the world, that life is temporary. Just a series of moments, and the key is to be plugged into each one as it comes, because that's really all you get. Take pleasure in what's happening when it happens, don't look ahead for something that might be, don't look back at what was. Somehow, coming down Monarch made those cliches become real. I see what you mean, she said. Arriving at those ideas in that way is different from just reading it in a self-help book. And I felt really close to you, he said, and I was really sorry about everything that's happened. And to show what he meant, he put his hands under her shirt. She said, it's late for me because I was already asleep. Oh, I skipped the funny joke. That's okay. All right, so I'm just going to jump ahead with this conversation that sort of illustrates this thing about marriage. They're at breakfast. He waited for her at breakfast the next morning to tell her the rest of it. It solves all our problems, he told her over the magazine he was hunkered behind. I saw lots of people on the brakes riding. Nothing can come between a man and a woman on a tandem bike. She smiled kindly. Nothing is going to come between us. Her narrow cheater glasses perched forward on her nose. And on a tandem, nothing can. Hey, what are you eating? His tone startled her, and she paused before holding open her palm. It's an energy bar, she said. Oh, no, he said. Cycle blasts are only for riders. I have a bike, I ride. He snorted. Look, when we get on the tandem and we're out on the road, then you get to eat a cycle blast. I don't want to ride a tandem bike. Well, you don't need a cycle blast just to go teach kindergarten. What, are you going to go bonk out getting the kids to line up single file? She folded away her magazine and took another bite. He pressed in closer. When was the last time you rode your bike anyway? Her bike was a Schwinn 3-speed she bought at a yard sale for $30 and had owned since high school. It had wide, white-wall tires and a seat commodious enough for a rider twice her girth. The tandem is going to be it's going to mark a fresh start for us, he said. I've never ridden one, and as far as I know, you never have either. I never have, as far as I know. Despite himself, he was hungry, and he fished out for the last cycle blast from the box. I suppose I would be the back rider, she said. The stoker, Natch. But we'll switch sometimes, and you can captain. Not at first, but after you get some, experience. Do I ever get to steer? From the back. He used his tongue to pry some of the thick slush from the molar. She creased her magazine at the picture of the yoga pose she was thinking about trying. Okay, I'm game. Might even be fun. I just don't like the feeling that you're making me ride the tandem as some sort of penance for perceived crimes that you think I've committed. You know what you did, he growled, but waved his hand to keep the conversation from slipping into that particular rut. The tandem is for both of us, he said quickly, so we can start all over. Clean slate the whole Michigans. Burn new memories, like Dr. Shiraz says. There aren't any bad memories. You need to stop talking like that. He took a deep breath. Anyway, it's not just you that needs penance. I have something I should tell you about. I met a woman on the race. She stared at me. He took another nibble of his bar and drummed his fingers at the table once before continuing. This gal was older than me, and she had a bike map holder from REI velcroed to the handlebars, the kind you sometimes see with the Shimano gear shifters. She shrugged cautiously. Anyway, it was sort of attached to her Trek mileage computer, and she and I managed to get lost briefly while coming into town. Gunnison, which was sort of a college town, not like Hotchkiss or Buena Vista, which were both pretty small and not hard to navigate in. But we got to base camp late, and it was too dark for both of us to set up our tents, so we both just pitched hers, me helping her being the lounge gentleman. And we drank a lot of beer at the beer garden in celebration. Remember I texted you about the New Belgium Brewery being kind of a sponsor? The lady brought my beer, and then she said I could crash in her teepee since we didn't have mine set up and it was getting cold. So I moved closer together to generate some heat. This was on the high school football field, and then she took off her clothes and she said I should do the same, to generate even more heat. She had a pretty good body too, for an older lady. Did this really happen? Absolutely. What sort of question is that? I don't know. I know you have that older lady thing, so it seems sort of a convenient detail. I'm sorry if this is hurting you. Also, you said it was too dark to see, so I don't know how all of a sudden you can tell she had the nice body. Well, I could tell from earlier, the way her Pearl Izumi bike pants fit. Anyway, all long-time rider bikes have those nice, and the thing about generating heat reminds me of that MASH episode, when, what's-his-name was hitting on Hot Lips, and we both know how nuts you are for MASH. Why would I make this up? I'm confessing something terrible. You want to hurt me. You were hurt, and whether you should or should not have been, that's no longer the issue. I understand that. But you were hurt, and you're still trying to hurt me. No, that's me before. I'm different now since having the epiphany. And besides, even if I made this up, what difference does it make? Isn't just thinking it bad enough? Thinking what? We had sex, me and the lady. I was cheating on you during the sexual encounter. It was pretty wild, too. Well, not that wild, maybe. Actually, pretty standard stuff. But we had our bike helmets on, which is at least sort of... Oh, and we did it 2 times in the same night. He leaned back in his chair and let that settle for a moment. Weren't you tired from all the bike riding? He snorted. Not that tired. Did this happen before or after the Monarch Pass ride? Excuse me? Did you have sex in your bike helmet with a shapely older lady like on MASH before or after your opinion? What difference does it make? He began fiddling with the salt shaker, tapping it a few times, trying to turn the bass like a top. Before I did. When you're on a trip like that, all the days kind of tend to blur. But I already told you what happened in Gunnison, and that was before Monarch, the night before, in fact. I'm sorry if you feel devastated by this. I would be devastated if I believed it, which I don't. I think your epiphanic moment didn't have as much lasting effect as you thought it would. But before you say anything else, I take the point that this is important to you. That's all you needed to do. I'll try a tandem. Let's rent one and go around the subdivision. Could be fun. Sure, you'll want your own bike in no time. You'll probably want to even accompany me on next year's bike ride across Colorado. Don't register me for the race just yet. I'm just trying this out. And don't get me any gear until I see how I like it. No jersey or pants, and for God's sake, don't buy me a livestock bracelet. Live strong. Wait a minute. Don't tell me you're against curing cancer, too. I'll just leave it there. So, are there any questions about riding or relationship? I can give you just relationship advice straight up. That's not a stretch.
You mentioned that your wife is also a writer.
Yes.
Have you ever written together, or do you avoid that because you're afraid of what it could do to your relationship?
It's a very good question. You know, we have written together. We've written essays together and published them under our name, both of our names. But we did write one story together, which I don't think is in this book, because I ended up, and we published it under a different name. And it was about a couple who, it was called Dead Man's Corpse, and it's about a couple who go out and find a dead body and cut it open, a large man, and then they both go inside of it and live their lives out inside this body. So it's not a very realistic story. But that was the only time we wrote together. And during the writing of that thing, she got a story published before I got a story published, and all of a sudden she didn't have time for writing. So that was really the only thing we do. But we do read each other's writing, and she's a good writer. She's a good writer. Oh yeah, very good. She's taught. She's lectured here on this very stage. Any other questions?
This competition between the two of you. It seems like that last answer you gave at least hinted at a certain time.
Yeah.
Were there times when one of you was more successful than the other, and how did it feel, and how does it even out, or I don't know, how do you negotiate that? My wife is a Brian, she's sort of glad.
Yeah. It's a curse and it's a blessing, as they say. I mean, we're definitely, we're definitely, one of us is always up, you know, at the moment. And there seems to be more harmoniousness in the house when I'm the one who's up a little bit. She seems to handle it better than I do. Unfortunately, she's generally up more than I am. Her book won a bigger prize, including the e-copies. I sold more books, but it was a negligible amount. But we definitely keep track of all that stuff. More than the level of, fortunately, neither one of us, we're both small time, so it's not that big a deal. But more than the success, the competition for the writing time is fierce in our house. We have kids and we have farm animals, so there's always a lot of stuff to do. And we got these cousins of our kids, nephews and nieces, who are always over taking our time off. And so we argue over the writing time, and we both have preference. The morning time is really the time everybody wants to write because you're fresh and nobody's, the afternoon time really feels like used goods writing time. That's actually her line, but it's true. So that's really what the competition is for. It's for the writing time, and it's for the attention. But mostly it's helpful because we do read each other's writing first. But we get into huge fights because I feel like she went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Maybe you've heard of that. It's got a little bit of a reputation. But and she went after I went to my workshop program. She had one of the best ones. Yeah, now that you mention it, I know what it is. Anything else? Yeah.
So let's say you have something that happens in your own relationship, or something you see in someone else's relationship, and it sparks an idea for a story, but maybe you don't fully feel that it can complete a story. Do you sit and think, okay, what can I build around this one instance, or do you kind of piece together other things, and you kind of have that on the back burner, and then you wait for a few other things to put it together?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's a process question, and I think that'd be different for every writer. But for me, it seems like I get a great idea for a story, and I get 8 pages into it, which is maybe like a quarter of the way into it, and then I'm just done. I don't know what to do next. And then I'll work on another thing, and then another thing, and then at some point I see there's like maybe 2 or 3 different pieces that I can put together and make one story out of it. So, and I think for a short story, you almost need to have 2 or 3 different ideas that bounce off each other, and that's sort of the process that has organically developed with me. The first story in here is In the Belly of the Cat. It was the one that was published in the Paris Review, and I sat down basically and wrote it in 3 days, and I've never had success like that since. I had no idea what was going on with me on those 3 days. But the reason why it worked is that I just drafted on an older story onto a newer idea. I had a guy who was canceling his newspaper subscriptions, and then I also had this idea about an old man who would call a hooker over for like one last night of, life basically before he shuffle. So, and I just put them together, and that's basically how it works for me. Also with the wife who writes, because we're both peering around for ideas, and we both live in a small farm community, obviously, we're both, in the same house. When anything happens, there is a real fight to get it out the door first. Who's going to be the one to claim it? We have one neighbor who lived on the same street of ours. He lived about maybe 0.6 of a mile away. He went to the Philippines and brought back a bride who was gone for about 10 days, fell in love with a young woman, brought her back home, and we just struggled, both of us really struggled to get that story out before the other one could do anything with it. Mine was, I tried to make mine really titillating and kind of like put myself in this situation, but she took a real sort of, she wrote it in third person and more humanistic. She got it out. Her story was a lot better, but that sort of thing happens all the time. Yes, sir.
Yeah, another sort of craft question. I'm fascinated in pieces of writing where tragedy and comedy can coexist, right, within the same story or poem, whatever. And I think you have a really good sense of, great comedy, but also these small tragedies occurring. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you kind of fuse those together, both kind of the playfulness and the sort of painfulness of the...
Yeah, thank you for saying that. In the title story in here, Married But Looking, it's about a guy who is cuckolded by his wife, and it's a funny story, and the way he responds to it, I'd like to think is funny, but there is also a lot of sadness in it. He's discovered, and it's a Facebook thing, and maybe it's happened, maybe it hasn't happened, and he's not exactly sure, and it's something he can't really talk to his wife about. So that's sort of, and the way that he handles it in that story, I'd like to encourage you all to go out and buy it. But the way that he handles it, they happen to be in Paris at the time when he discovers it on his insurance settlement money because he accidentally set his house on fire. And he decides he goes into this Pigalle strip club, and while she's up on Facebook talking to, and I kind of like put those together a little bit. So I do think you need both. I mean, flat out comedy. Even that first story that I read about the kiss, I try to put something in there that there was the sadness, at least on his end, that he actually, nothing was ever going to happen. Mostly because he was a coward. But, there was this night and it wasn't going to work out, and that's why. So, yeah, I do think it's important to at least play with both those elements, especially if you're going to make it a realistic story. If you're going to have any kind of longevity with the piece. If the story's going to find a readership.
And do you accomplish that by sort of combining different pieces, like you were answering with Chris's question, or
yeah, maybe. I'm not really sure. I mean, story ideas don't really come from you don't really see like a guy falling over and hitting his head and thinking that would be a great story. I mean, there's usually got to be something behind it. And there is, in marriage, while there's great happiness and great moments, there is also always great sadness because you're really, the rewards for a long marriage don't come until, about that 10-year mark, 15-year mark. And even then, they might not be coming at all. And so there's this great sadness that you've maybe invested in this, and maybe, the line's different from your spouse. I'm not talking about my relationship with his partner, but for you, this might be the case. So I mean, that's, and playing with those ideas as a writer is important. Otherwise, every story is exactly the same. The ones I read to you were all, kind of talky stories, but that's because I sort of was trying to, it works better than said. But believe me, there's a lot of action in these. Car chases. Lots of jungle adventures. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Have you ever written a story based on something that either happened to you or happened to someone you knew and they found out?
No. Yes. Every single, yeah. The worst one, there's a story in here called Best Man, where I was the best man at a friend of mine's wedding, and he was like the ladies' man at school, and I was like I guess they call it a wingman now, is that the correct term? Back in my day, we didn't have such terminology. I was just his dumpy friend as well. I made him look good by standing next to him. But so our whole high school experience in college really was me being interested in girls and them being interested in him, and him taking advantage of the girls, and then him breaking up with the girls, and then me being friends with the girls. And that was, so I tried to write about that in this story, Best Man. And in a rare act of viciousness. I didn't change his name, and I put a few unflattering. I've never done that before. I haven't done this with any other story. But the funny thing is that he's like my oldest, most loyal friend, and he was like the first guy who bought the book and said he was going to buy it. And I thought to myself, should I give him a little heads up on this, or should I just let this play out? I thought he's not going to read it. I just assume nobody's going to read it. You know, when your friends buy your book, I assume that that's it. The transaction is over. But he read it, and he contacted me, and he said he wanted to talk to me about it. I was a little bit scared. We talked a little bit, and we had a nice talk, and he said, oh, I didn't know you really felt this way. And I said, oh, no, I don't. It was completely fictional. I had him in the story having sex. It's his wedding, but he has sex with one of the brothers. Which, to my knowledge, didn't happen. But, I mean, it was really the meanest thing you could do to somebody. I'm a better person than I'm in therapy. I wouldn't do that to somebody. Or at least I've changed it. Everybody else in here has got a big name.
That just makes me want to ask, have you ever seen the movie The Best Man from like the late 90s?
I feel like I've seen 100 movies called that. Which one is
so
it?
This one is where they're all college friends, and one of the college friends goes on to be a writer. And his first big book is basically a veiled story of his best friend, and he has like this veiled part of how like he had a night when he almost ended up, doing things with the woman the guy's about to marry, and they're all together at the wedding after they haven't seen each other for a while. And then the guy goes in the back and reads the book and he wants to kill him. And I just thought of that when you were talking about that.
Obviously,
It'd be a nice weekend movie for you to check.
I'll check it out. Best Man?
It's called The Best Man.
Best
It's
Man.
like
Okay.
98, 99, something like that.
It's a good era for movies.
Yeah.
There's some ramen and comment.
What are you writing now that you're really excited about?
That's a great question. I've been working on this novel for 3 years, and I've been alternately excited about it and not excited about it. And there was a period of time where I had representation, which is the standard. It was also, she was excited about it, and then she's also not excited about it anymore. So I don't know what's going to happen. But I have so many unpublished novels that I decided that this one was going to be my last unpublished novel, and I'll call it a career then when it doesn't move. Or just publish it on my own. Pretend like I wanted to do that all along. But it's a different kind of a story. I thought, well, it should be long, and it's going to be very plot driven, but it's ending up to sound like a lot of dialogue. It's ending up to be a